Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, and this is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning, joined this morning joyfully by my dear friends, Rabbi Sherry Hirsch of the American Jewish University and Rabbi Mark Gelman of Golf Digest and North Florida, and we're delighted to have all of you there with us. This morning, we continue our reading of the Torah in the book of Leviticus, and we come across a section which is rather startling for many reasons. Literarily, because it's one of the very, very few, I think there's only two sections of narrative in the whole book of Leviticus. And Genesis and Exodus are largely stories. They're narrative, and as is Numbers, but this is a very, 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 very few verses of narrative in Leviticus. It's mostly laws and traditions having to do with the priests and the sanctuary. But the section we're going to read, beyond being literarily unique, is unique because of its disturbing nature. So let's look together. The Parsha is called Shmini, which means the eighth. It's the eighth day of the ordination of the priesthood. Moses has been instructed to take Aaron and his sons and to ordain them as the priests of Israel. And there is a certain kind of ritual that has gone on for an entire week. And the week comes to an end at this moment. And then there what we could call an industrial accident. After the ordination of the priesthood, Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, took fire in his pan. They took the fire pan, they put fire in it and laid incense on it, and they offered before the Lord. And the Hebrew is Eish Zara. It's translated here as alien fire, Eish Zara, strange fire. And that's undesignated. We don't know what that exactly means, which God had not enjoined upon them. Lo tziva otam, God had not commanded that. A fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. And thus they died at the instance of the Lord. Ve'amnu lifnei Adonai. So the two boys, Nadab and Abihu, the two oldest sons of Aaron, now newly consecrated as priests, walk into the sanctuary with a fire pan and Eish Zara, and fire comes from the Ark of the Covenant, as it were, just like in the movie, and destroys these two young men. Now, what happens at this point? What is the response in the community? What a horrible tragedy. And think for just a moment as we gather this in, this is the highest moment of Aaron's life. He's been ordained as the high priest of Israel. And his children have been ordained as priests of Israel. And at the moment of his greatest joy and accomplishment, two of his sons are consumed, are destroyed by the God he is responsible for worshiping. Then Moses said to Aaron, and listen to the strange words, this is what the Lord meant when he said, through those near to me, I show myself holy, or I am, it's Bikrovai Ekadesh. Those near to me, I am made holy, or shown to be holy. Again, glory before all the people, and gain glory before all the people. Kol ha'am echabed. And then the two words at the end of the sentence, Vayidom Aharon. Aaron was silent. Moses calls to Mishael and Elphazan, the sons of Uzziah, uncle of Aaron, the nephews, in other words, and says, come forward and carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp. They came forward and carried them out of the camp as Moses had ordered. And Moses said to Aaron, do not bare your heads. And now the instructions go on. What is this story about? And how do we understand the silence of Aaron in the face of the incredible tragedy of the loss of his children? Let's discuss that this morning. Sherry, why don't you begin?
So, first of all, that was a beautiful explanation, Eddie. And so nice to see you both. I missed you for the last couple of weeks. It's so nice to see all of our audience again virtually on this platform. These two words, Vayidom Aharon, are two of my most prized words in the Torah. And you're supposed to not have favorites, right? If someone says to you, pick your favorite verse in the Torah, people often answer, oh, that's like asking you to pick my favorite child. But you and I both know we all have children that we have better compatibility with. And these are two words. This is a phrase in the Torah that has so much resonance for me. And so there's three prominent questions that I'd love to look at today. One, What was their sin that was so bad that warranted being murdered by God? And no matter what the commentators try to do, flip it, figure it out, there is no sin that warrants God killing Aaron's two oldest sons. Really, even if they were teenagers, we all know that teenagers are working with half a brain. Like, come on. The second question is Aaron's silence. Was that root dam? Does that mean that he was silent? Does that mean acceptance? Does that mean revenge? Was that meaning tacit, understanding? What does that his response actually mean? And there's a lot of ways to interpret it. And then the last part of this section is then Moses instructs Aaron to not do the Shiva rites, to not mourn, but he tells the community to mourn. And the rabbis have to jump over and do backflips trying to figure out why Aaron is prevented from mourning. So I think you have in 2 words the context of 3 very powerful questions that I think are very telling about our own lives. Ooh, you're on mute.
I know. What's your guess? What's your guess about the sin? What do you think? What do you read as the sin that caused this this catastrophe?
Well, the rabbis come up with all kinds of things. They were too close to the fire. They lacked faith that God wouldn't provide it. They were egotistic. They were trying to be like Moses and Aaron. They even come up with that they weren't dressed appropriately. Possibly they were drunk. But my favorite interpretation, they come up with that they were disrespecting the fathers. But my favorite one, the rabbis are trying so hard to do these backflips, is that they were showing excessive piety. They were trying to get too close to God too fast, and therefore God punished them. Now, nobody in their right mind, and if you think about it, this as Aaron as a parent bearing his child, and Eddie, Mark, you and I both know that in our careers, we bury children, and it is incomprehensible. And it is the worst thing we do in our career. And you can't even call it a career because it's just the worst. That in no way, if the legitimate reason that they should be killed is that they were trying to be super pious and be really close to God, really, rabbis, that's the best you can come up with. So what is a real sin that 2 teenagers, 2 young boys can do that warrants God killing them? Because we've seen like Pinchas killing another Jew, killing a zealot, right? We've seen other acts of priestly violence, but we haven't seen an act where God is violent to Aaron in such a demonstrative way. And if you notice right after, what does Moses do? He tries to make excuses for God. So Mark, I'm interested in your take.
Mark, what's your take? What was the sin?
Well, you won't hear me say this often, but I have no idea. I don't know. None of us know. I mean, what is Ish Sarah? What is strange fire? My reaction to that, and I think, Sherry, that's a beautiful analysis of it that you offered us, and the way the rabbis struggled. First thing I learned from what you said and what we've encountered before, and I've sort of made an unction of myself by constantly bringing up parts of the Torah I hate in order to give people courage to say, these are parts that I can't live with. The Evet Olam, the Huyim Shalbach. I've mentioned several verses in the Torah that I can't hear God speaking through those verses. And I'm certainly willing to add this verse to those that I don't like. However, I've always taken this in a different way, precisely because of our experience, the 3 of us, in burying children, which isn't just the hardest thing we do. It's the most impossible thing we do. Because the first thing, when I mentor young rabbis and I try and just simply explain to them the mistakes I made when I was a baby rabbi, the first thing we do that is destructive to the grief of parents who are burying children is we try to explain anything to them. They're not in a place where they can hear an explanation of why their kid died. They can't hear it. And what I learned is that the best response that I was able to offer my congregants when I had to go through this deep, dark valley of death was silence. Silence, in which I was just there to sit with them and be with them. And I think the phrase "Vayidom Aaron" is a brilliant phrase, a luminous phrase, because I think it describes one of the deepest teachings of the Torah, and that is its humanity and its compassion. When you lose a child, and this also applies to other loved ones you lose, but obviously and particularly with children, the only response that is possible, and Aaron understands this, is silence. Silence. And I think respecting the silence of the mourners and understanding that the purpose of faith is not to explain things, is not to say, your child died and here are 4 reasons or explanations why your child died, or what good can come out of your child's death. The right response is simply to understand that there are parts of life that are so dark and so crushing that our intellectual muscles are stressed out and fail us. Our spiritual muscles fail us. And when our impulse to explain things goes away, when we let go of it, like opening our hand and letting a bird that we have had in our hand fly free, when we let go of our attempt to explain things, we can live through the worst grief. It's when we try to figure this stuff out that we go into bad places like anger at God, or some kind of feeling that God is unjust. And so that's my response, was that they did something bad. I mean, the case I think of when I think of the children of Aaron is teenagers who are killed because they drive a car too fast, or because
but God didn't come down and send a fire and consume them. And the word after the fire consumed them says, and they were dead on the spot, lest you think, like the burning bush, that it was ablaze but not consumed. The second part of the sentence is they were dead, right? And then you get this weird thing of Aaron being silent. And let me just add to that, Mark, which is so interesting. There's another word for silence, which is vayishtok, right? And there's an interpretation that they use the word damem, like this root, because it is literally the difference between vayishtok, which is to shut your mouth, versus vayidimem, which is like to be that like inner quiet of like, now, is that a silent scream? Is that just the pain? Is that, it has multiple meanings. It can be that he was struck dumb. It can be that he was struck still, like he was paralyzed from this, right? There's so many
I think that's what it is. He was
right?
paralyzed.
Like, he was just struck still, like you were just paralyzed. And there's there's a beautiful interpretation that says, that it's related to the word dam, that he bled out, right? That like in that moment, I have a very strong belief of what I think it is. There's lots of interpretations, but I have my own interpretation.
What is it?
So let me go through some of the other interpretations. there's an interpretation that Moses says to him, don't mourn, let the people mourn on your behalf, because you're the leader of the people and you need to role model for them holding strong and not being vulnerable, which is the opposite of what we would think today. And that your reward will be that God will speak to you alone in the next time God speaks, which is what happens, right? Usually God speaks to both Moses and Aaron, but the next thing that happened is God speaks directly to Aharon. So, is he rendered speechless? What is this? I actually have a different interpretation. If you think about who Aaron was, the first time God spoke to him was when Moses refused to be the speaker for the people. And God appears to Aaron and Moshe and says, Aaron, you're going to do the talking. So who is he? He's the middle child. He's the diplomat. He's the peacemaker. I don't know if you have a middle child, but the middle child in our house is the negotiator. Like, on behalf of the family, I want to work with you guys. He's the one that has the charisma that garnered the golden calf. He's the one that made those very profound speeches to Pharaoh to let the people go. He's the one that gossiped about. So what we really know about Aaron is there's nothing he can't talk about. He is a talker, and that is his superpower. And so what he does when he's Vayidom is he's saying to God, I reject you. This is my revenge. You think you appointed me and you gave me all these superpowers. You know what? You're not in charge anymore. I'm in charge, and I'm going to take everything you've given it to me, and I'm going to show you revenge, because what you've done is beyond the pale. And no commentator I found talks about that, but I think there's a really strong case to be made that Aaron is not just angry, he is silently screaming, and even takes it up a notch with revenge, right? There's anger, there's brutal anger, and then there's I'm seeking revenge, and Aaron goes beyond it.
It's a wonderful reading. When I read this, what I read in the rabbis who read this, I read in the Midrash, is they're going to step away from the pshat of the Torah. They're going to step away from the actual event, because the actual event, first of all, is told in such a terse, spare way. And it's such a disturbing story. But what the rabbis are going to ask is, why was this story told? What kind of meaning are we meant to get from this story? And I think that what the rabbis of the tradition tried to do, and as I read the Midrashim that you made reference to, is that they recognize that these boys died in the practice of their religion. And the idea that religion can be dangerous, that there are many aspects of being a human being that can be dangerous, or rather that touch upon dangerous things, So one of the Midrashim is when it says Eish Zara, this strange fire that they brought, Sherry, what you pointed out, that it's youthful enthusiasm. And here the question is that a structured religious tradition comes to regulate how we practice faith, because religious enthusiasm, what we call spirituality, can often go awry, can often bring people to some very self-destructive places. And that one of the things that a religious tradition does is, bring us back to ourselves. So there's a very famous story in the Talmud about 4 great scholars of the 2nd century who enter the Pardes. And they understand this, enter into the mystical reflection on the world. And one of them goes crazy. Ben Zoma goes crazy. Ben Azai dies. Elisha ben Abuya becomes an apostate, and only Rabbi Akiba goes in and comes out whole, because he's the one who's most attached to structured tradition. It gives him a way of understanding what's happening to him in this. It's why in the Jewish tradition, you're not permitted to study the mystical texts until you're married, until you have a home, until you have a mortgage, until you've been pious. You have to have a structure around you, because youthful enthusiasm could lead to all sorts of interesting kinds of insanities. That's one way of understanding it. Another way of understanding it, Nina, my wife, this was her senior sermon at JTS.
Oh, really?
Yes. So we studied this Parsha very carefully, and she came to a different conclusion. There's a little quirk of the story. It says the 2 boys went in with his Eish Zara, and a fire from God came and killed them. And then Moses comes and says these words to Aaron, and Aaron is quiet. And then it says he talks to the two cousins and he says, I want you to take them out of the tent, out to the outskirts of the camp by their tunics. So what that means is that the fire didn't burn up their clothes. So there's a midrash that said that the fire entered their nostrils and burned out their insides. So,
Their soul. The midrash says it burned out their soul.
no, but think about, so what is it trying to say? So what was the Eish Sarah? If that's the punishment, what was the sin? The sin was the opposite of what you said. The sin was that they offered the sacrifices bidiyuk, precisely, meticulously, according to the technique that was legislated, but with no heart. That they didn't bring any soul, any heart to their faith. And that what happens when you practice religion, what happens when you practice, when you love a family, what happens when you try to create art, what happens when you legislate and rule a nation, but with no heart, with no soul, with no intention, with no love, with no attachment, with no deep, utter commitment and devotion, what happens is something dies.
And we should all be worried,
Precious
Eddie.
dies.
Right. Beautiful reading, except that we should all be worried. Because if God feels that we don't have enough heart when we are bringing ourselves to God, let me tell you, there's a lot of days I don't bring myself to God, right? And so this being a story that's told in the Bible that is symbolic of if you don't bring your heart to God, I mean, we're in trouble.
Well, I don't think you're in trouble of a terrible fire coming and destroying you.
Correct.
But all of us have had the experience. I think I would imagine we've all had the experience of. We even use the expression in English. My heart wasn't in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I tried to teach a class. My heart wasn't in it. I was talking to my kid. I wasn't really paying attention to what I was saying. I was spending time with my partner, my loved one, my soulmate, but my soul wasn't present. I tried to, it's all the parts of life in which we act out the technique of the action without the internal aspect. And when it's external and not internal, the Torah is saying something dies. Something dies. Something dies in a family when we can't really turn toward each other with real love and affection and intimacy. Something dies in a community when we go through the motions. Something dies in the creation of art when there isn't really heart behind it.
I totally agree. And I totally agree. And we're also the people that it's action before faith. We're supposed to act as if. We're not supposed to wait until we feel the Spirit fill us for Shabbat.
Yes,
and then
but
we light the candles.
Spirit has to come, though. You have to have some spirit involved in it. And the problem is that so much of what we do is
so maybe God was just impatient. Maybe the Spirit hadn't come to them yet. I mean, like, do you know what I'm saying? It's just a very.
I appreciate. I'm trying to. The story is so spare and so sparse that it lends itself to so many remarkable interpretations.
There's a story. Go ahead.
I think both of you have really captured the part of it, which is the deepest part, which is the pathos of Aaron.
Yeah, I just wanted to add. I see an element of this in our own work. I don't think this. I began with a sort of universal interpretation of Vayidom Aaron. It's about the crushing silence that happens in deep grief. But there's another element which is more professional. That's our work as rabbis. And that is that we are held to a different standard as ordinary, as other Jews. And there's many ways to describe this. Sociologists have called it rabbis as symbolic exemplars, that people look to rabbis as, well, I'm not going to practice Judaism. It's too much for me, but you Rabbi, you'll be my Jew, and you practice it for me. And I think that's sort of the lesson of the sons of Aaron, that if your work is to stand as an exemplar for the people, you have a much higher standard. Whatever it was that was alien, and my personal inclination is that they did exactly what Moses did, and what caused God to keep Moses from entering the land. And that was they put ego in front of their calling. They put their own, as Moses says, are we supposed to do this for you? So God said, because you didn't sanctify me at the waters of Meribah, you will not enter the land. And I think that's probably what the sons of Aaron did. They probably acted as if they were the magicians. And rabbis have that problem too sometimes. We act as if and the children I taught every week in the shul, I had to actually make sure they understood that I wasn't God. You know, that's what they look at me and they see that. So I think was it too strong a penalty? Was the punishment of Moses too strong a penalty? I think God's response is, look, if you want to do this public work of representing me on planet Earth, you have to do it in my name, not in your name. And they didn't do that. And Moses didn't do that. And I think it's part of the courage of the Torah that there are no heroes in it. There's no one in the Torah like Ulysses.
But I think you would learn from the story
like
that,
Achilles.
Mark, I would learn from the story something else that you added about a symbolic exemplar, which is Moses says to Aaron, don't mourn, you carry this role that you need to be holier than thou, and let the people mourn and their comfort be enough for you. And what I think is so sad about it is today, I think we would take an opposite approach. We would learn the opposite lesson. When we don't have role models modeling for us vulnerability, sadness, grief, then we don't learn how to do it, right? We don't learn what we need. And so the idea of the symbolic exemplar being holier than thou and doing other, I actually think the movement is away from that we need our leaders to show their vulnerabilities. We needed Aaron. I am sure that community needed Aaron to see him grieve the loss of his two children, because if he didn't grieve the loss of his two children, what standing do I have to grieve my losses, whatever they are? So I think it might be one of the stories where we learn lehefech, the opposite.
Well, I think you're exactly right that is our tradition today, that most young rabbis feel more comfortable presenting their doubts publicly. The only time my pal Tom Hartman got angry, that I ever saw him actually get angry, was on one of our weekly television shows, The God Squad. And we were interviewing seminary students. And he asked them, what are your beliefs about God? And there were 4 of them, and all of them said, well, I have real doubts about my belief in God. And after the show, Tom was just at wit's end. He was furious. He said, how can you ordain people to stand before a congregation intending to give them hope and faith in God when they don't have hope and faith in God? That's just wrong. They should have another job. They should do something else. And what you're saying, Jerry, is, yeah, well, this modern sort of what I would call touchy-feely Judaism.
I don't think it's Judaism. I don't think it's touchy-feely. I actually think
this idea of presenting your doubts.
Here's what I would say. It's transparent.
Honest with your vulnerabilities.
No, here's what I would say. If you're a human being, you are going to have doubts. The rabbis understood that, right? They deal with fake all the time, doubt. But I think it's transparent Judaism. It's not hierarchical Judaism.
Well,
That's
yes, but people are not coming to you or me or Eddie to hear us spill our doubts all over them like yesterday's dinner. They are coming to us to get hope for their life and strength for their faith.
Why does I mean, Eddie, you can jump in here, but why does the existence of doubt eliminate the possibility for hope?
Well, because what you're doubting is the existence of a God who will give you hope and give you salvation and rescue you from your despair. That's what and reaffirm the belief that death is not the end of us. There's lots of things we do, lots of things we say that we need to say, that they doubt and that we can't doubt. if we want to be rabbis. And I shared Tommy's bewilderment and how he was upset.
So here's what I
about
would
it.
say. It could be generational for sure. And yet it's not touchy-feely. I touchy-feely didn't means that it's like kind of a criticism. It's like guru, granola Judaism. I
It's
actually don't-
absolutely a criticism. Yes.
Okay, let's be
I hope
clear.
you got that right.
At least-
That's
at least
exactly
he's
why
honest.
I intended it.
I
think
actually-
He may
rabbis
be
are there-
judgmental, but at least he's honest. That's
They're the
Fair.
pillar of faith. Rabbis are supposed to be pillars of faith. If you want to do something else and you're not, and you don't have faith, that's fine. You're not a bad person, but you're just a bad rabbi, and you should do something else with your life.
I think this is such a wonderful generational divide. I have to tell you, Mark,
I think you may be right on
I
that.
agree with both of you because I have a foot in each generation. But I
Yes,
think
you do.
there was a generation of rabbis that preceded mine, where the rabbi lost, it was always his, excuse me, Sheriff, his first name. His
It was the
first name
fact.
became rabbi, and his personal life became clouded behind the role, and he never took off his tie, right? He slept in his tie and showered in his tie, because he was always the rabbi, right? And then my generation came along and we wanted something more. We wanted something called personal authenticity. And people were not upset by a rabbi who said, that disturbs me too. And I do have doubts, and I don't have this wall of faith that I present to you. They much preferred the rabbi to confess their faith. However, I think that Mark could be right in the sense that can go too far.
Yes.
That I have to demonstrate, that I can demonstrate to my congregation, to my friends, to my congregation, to my students, that I too struggle with these issues, but I've spent some time resolving them and coming to some conclusions and coming to some firm beliefs that it's not all fuzzy, but I do have some deep convictions which I share that are beyond my doubts, that are beyond the power of my own doubts. And it's the inability to share those convictions that I think that Mark is referring to. Go ahead, Sherry.
Well, yes, and I have a very personal story that animates it. My father died when I was on the pulpit. And see, it's my generation. I have a personal story to animate it, right?
That's okay.
But my father died when I was on the pulpit after my first year. And I, after Shlushim, the 30 days, got back up on the bima and was supposed to go rah, rah, God, because that was the role that I was trained for. And I found myself, I couldn't even say it. And I was so clear about my doubts and how violently he had been taken through pancreatic cancer and how challenging it had been and how Shloshim, all that stuff. And I was sure when I got off that bima that I would be packing up my office on Monday and be like, we're so happy to have you as a rabbi for the last year. We wish you well in your future endeavors. And my office was flooded, not with young people, Mark, with everyone that was experiencing loss and a high percentage of much more senior citizens, because they finally heard, oh my God, the rabbi who has to have ultimate faith, they're giving me permission to have a little bit of sveik, a little bit of doubt. And so to me, it's like, yes, it's generational. And of course it can go too far, but people are hungry for humanity. They're hungry for the humanity of Judaism. And I think that story where Vayidom Aharon he was suppressing his humanity. Because
I'm interested, Sherry, I'm interested, what, if you recall, were the doubts that you shared with your congregation on the day that you had come back to the bima?
I didn't have.
What were the doubts?
I can't remember word for word. So please, if
No,
someone was
but
there
in
at that
general,
sermon, but
in
here's what I
general.
would say. I didn't have doubts about the ritual and community of Judaism. That was reinforced to me how important that was.
Yes.
What I struggled with was what kind of God? I mean, really, I don't want to go so graphic, but both my parents were taken from me very violently and very significant illnesses. My mother's skin fell off her face, not to get too graphic. My father got so emaciated that he couldn't actually swallow food. So it was like this horrific, tragic way of dying. It was like immense suffering. Talk about not having it's not going to sleep and dying, right? It was horrific. horrific dying that stripped him of every kind of dignity. I'm like, this is the construct that God's created for us to die? Like, really?
I want to interrupt for a second because I want to end the story. There's a section at the end of the story which we haven't talked about yet. So I want to just take a peek at this before we conclude our conversation. So let's go back to the story, okay? So Moses commands the two nephews to carry the boys out of the camp, the bodies of the two boys out of the camp. And they carried them out. And then Moses says to Aaron and to his two surviving sons, Eleazar and Itamar, who were also ordained that day, and who now will take over the role of priests of Israel, do not bare your heads or rend your clothes, lest you die in anger, strike the whole community. Well, that's what Sherry's saying. What he's saying to them is you are not permitted to show personal mourning in front of the community. You are now ordained priests, and as ordained priests, you have given up the prerogative. You have given up the prerogative of demonstrating the rituals of mourning because you have to serve the community. You have to serve the community at this point. But your kinsmen, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that the Lord has wrought. Everyone else is going to mourn, but you guys can't, because I need you to function as priests in front of this community at this point. I need you to lead, even though I know your hearts are broken. And don't go outside the tent of the meeting lest you die, because the oil is still covering you. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, drink no wine, you or your sons, as you enter the tent, you may die. And that's one of the origins of the idea that one of the things that might have been the infraction was drunkenness. And then what happens at the very end, here's the very end of the story. Moses speaks to Aaron and to the sons, Itamar and Eleazar, take the meal offering that is left over and eat it unleavened besides the altar. And you'll eat it in the sacred precinct. So they have to finish the sacrifice that had been started the day before, right? And he gives them the order for the sacrifice. And then at the end of the story, Moses inquires, he said, did you eat it? Did you were to have a sacred meal, which is the consummation of the sacrificial ritual? And they hadn't. And Moses says to them, he was angry with Eleazar and Itamar. Why didn't you eat the sin offering? For it is holy and it removes guilt from the people, and its blood was not brought into the sanctuary. And then Aaron steps up and says, look, they brought the sin offering and the burnt offering for the Lord, and such things have befallen me. Had I eaten the sin offering today, would the Lord have approved? Now, so what happens is Moses says, you didn't finish the sacrifice. You were supposed to have a sacred meal. And Aaron says, look, I did everything I was supposed to do, but I don't have the stomach to sit down and have a meal right now. I've just lost my two sons. And you have to imagine that the smell of these two boys is still in the air, or at least it's in the nostrils of poor Aaron. And Aaron says, come on, guy, give me a break. And Moses, and this time it's Moses who's quiet. He doesn't answer him. He doesn't say a word. Vayishma Moshe, Moses heard it, v'itav be'inav, and it was okay in his eyes. At the very end of the story, Aaron says, bro, give me a break. I'm having a hard time here. And the beautiful thing is that Aaron was quiet before, and now it's Moses who's quiet. And now it's Moses who's quiet. It's a brilliant and a remarkable and a very interesting story. I want to finish today with just another word. We are in this remarkable week, the week that unites Yom HaShoah, the day of remembering of the Shoah, of the Holocaust and all of its horrors, Vayidom Aharon, and our silence is so powerful, whether it's a silence of acceptance or a silence of grief or a silence of protest, our silence in the horror of the destruction of 6 million. And then this coming week is Yom HaAtzmaut, this moment of redemption, of salvation, of recreation, of rebirth. And that's the week that we're in. It's between the saddest moment and the happiest moment of the Jewish 20th century, and perhaps the saddest moment and happiest moment in centuries and centuries of Jewish life. And we head from darkness to light. This really is the journey that Passover predicted for us. From Yagon, from agony of Yagon, the agony of slavery and of destruction, to the simcha and the dignity of a rebirth of the people Israel. And we'll celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut. First, we'll celebrate Yom HaZikaron on Tuesday night and Wednesday, and then Wednesday night, Yom HaAtzmaut, the beginning of Israel Independence Day. And it's a remarkable gift. It's a remarkable gift to be able to move from one of these things to the other, but awfully confusing and awfully powerful. So let's finish with a moment of joy. Let's finish with a moment of happiness. Let's finish with a moment of celebration, because we owe it to the Jewish people. Yom HaAtzmaut is coming. State of Israel is real. It's a powerful place. It is a powerful reality for Jews in the world today. I need to know what place and what time is your favorite Israeli experience? What place and what time is your favorite Israeli story? Okay. Sherry, if you got one.
Eddie, it's so unfair. It's again asking for your favorite child, because I'm like,
just
I literally, I
Just
divided it by
one.
thirds. Like I was like the Golan, the Kinneret, the South.
All right,
I mean,
so pick one. I promise you next year I'll ask you the same question.
okay, so my favorite recent experience was when I took my children when we were in the Golan, and it was a Monday morning, and we went to the top of Mount Hermon, and it's freezing cold if you've been there. And we looked down and we looked into Syria, and there was gunfire. And my son turned to us and said, and it's supposed to be a joyful moment, but just it'll get there, I promise. And he said to me, "What do they have to fight about on a Monday morning?" And I said, "You know what? They have nothing to fight about on a Monday morning." And I said, "Because we are in the land of the free. We're in our homeland." And Emmett said, "Someone should go down there." He was little at the time. "Someone should go down there and tell them it's Monday morning. It's not a good fighting day. There's too much joy to celebrate in the world." So that's my most recent favorite Israel story.
Mark, you got an Israel story?
Oh yeah, this it's a moment that changed my life. It was the summer of 1966. I was a Hebrew major at the university and was in Israel for my first time. And I was introduced to Nelson Glick, the president of the Hebrew Union College, who became my principal mentor in my life. And Nelson took a liking to me, and I was in awe of him. He took me up to the roof of Hebrew Union College, which is Ben Yehuda. It's on what is it, Ben Yehuda Street? Where
On Mount Scopus.
No, the building next to the King David Hotel.
It's on King David Street.
On King David
King
Street.
David Street.
On
Right.
King David Street.
So he takes me to the top, and he says, "This is what I want you to know. Over there is the Kotel, and we can't go there, but I can see buildings that are right near there from our rooftop. And I want you to know that the Muslim Ummah, the Muslim community, believes that Jerusalem is the axis mundi, the navel of the universe, the actual place out of which the entire universe was created by God." And he looked at me with these piercing blue eyes, and he said, "Mark, I believe they're right." And at that moment, I understood that I was not in Israel, and I was not falling in love with Israel. And I have never fallen in love with Israel. I fell in love with Zion, Zion, which is the spiritual understanding of Israel, not a state in the secular universe, but an understanding that some places on this earth are places where heaven and earth kiss. And Nelson Glick taught me that, and it changed my life.
That's beautiful. That's wonderful. So I'll give you my story, and then we'll say good Shabbos to everyone. I was a student at the Hebrew University. I was studying Jewish philosophy. I was writing a paper on a 19th century Jewish philosopher and there was a book that I needed from that philosopher, and a book about that philosopher. So I went to the library. The way the Hebrew University Library works, you've heard of the Dewey Decimal System? They don't use it. You've heard of the Library of Congress system? They don't use it either. They had a simple system. When the library was started in 1929, the first book they bought was book number 1. The second book was book number 2. And it didn't matter what these books were about, agrarian economics or Jewish mysticism, they were shelved. And there was a card catalog that told the librarian where the books were. So the way, if you needed to check out a book, you go to the library, you fill out a petek, you fill out a little slip of paper that tells you, I want this book. And and yet there's a number you put on there. And the librarian goes down to the stacks and he comes back a half an hour later with your book. So what you always did was whenever you went for coffee, you always brought coffee and sweet rolls for the librarians, because otherwise you'd never get your books. So I built a nice relationship with this one fellow. I brought him a lot of sweet rolls and a lot of coffee. And I go to him and I say, Shlomo, taseli tova, do me a favor. I need this book right away. I'm writing this essay, and this is the one book that I need to get this. So he says, okay, he says, stay here 10 minutes. I'll go get your book. He goes downstairs. He comes back. It's a sour look on his face. I say, Makara, what happened? He said, well, ani mitztaer, I'm so sorry. Sefer enenu. The book isn't here. I said, what do you mean the book isn't here? I need the book. Who else could be reading this book? It's such an obscure thing. He says, Ani avdok, I'll go check, find out where the book is. He comes back a few minutes later. He says, mazal shalcha, good luck. I found the book. I said, oh, wonderful. Where is it? He says, it's in so-and-so professor's office. I say, wonderful. Where's his office? I'll go check. He says, oh, ani mitztaer, I'm so sorry to tell you this. Who mate? He died. I said, when did he die? He said, lifnei 5 shanim. He died 5 years ago. I said, the book's in his office? And he's dead 5 years? He says, yeah, no one's opened the office since then. I said, oh my God, how can the book be there if he's dead? And he says, lo livdok, lo lidok, don't worry. I have a solution for you. Mazeh, hazeh shekatav et hasefer, husham b'sifriya, the guy who wrote the book, the author of the book, he's sitting in the library, in the reading room. I said to him, who chai? He's still alive? He said, Kanire, it looks that way, you know.
So it seems.
This is true. So I go over in the library, and there's this elderly European gentleman. And you know that he's European because he's wearing a tweed jacket and a tie. And he has pince-nez and little glasses, wire glasses. And the only people in Israel wear a coat and a tie, you know, and he's sitting there, and I tap him on the shoulder, and he's deep in study with some ancient book. And I said, Professor, I'm so sorry. Can I ask you a question? I'm writing a paper on so-and-so. He said, oh, I wrote a book on that. I said, yes, I know. And I need your book. I said, in Hebrew, I need Tzarech et HaSefer. He says, oh, you'll never find it. So-and-so checked it out and he's been dead. I said, I know. I said, do you happen to have another copy of the book? So he looks at me and says, tell you what, let's go get a coffee. You'll ask me questions. I'll tell you what's in the essay. So we go downstairs to the Miznon, to the cafeteria. And this incredibly important scholar of Jewish thought sits with me for an hour and answered all my questions, and says to me, I want to read the essay when you're done with your book. And so so then at the end of we have coffee, we have a sweet. And then he says to me, he says, you busy Shabbos? Matsui b'Shabbat, you around on Shabbos? I said, came back. I said, why don't you do this? Come to my house 4 o'clock and we'll have some tea. I said, Tada, and he writes me out his address. So of course I went out, I bought a box of cake, you know, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I knock on the door, and this little lady comes to the door, and she says, oh, you're one of the students, come in, we've been expecting you. And you walk in this tiny apartment in Rechavia where there's books everywhere. I mean, that's all there were. It's just books in 100 languages. And I sat with this wonderful scholar of Jewish law, of Jewish thought, and his wonderful, sweet, and giving wife. I sat with them, you know, for a couple of hours, you know, and then we made Havdalah and we went home. And Israel allowed me to touch Jewish history and let Jewish history touch me. And that's what's so beautiful. So I thank all of you for sharing your Torah today. And thank you for being with us. And to everyone online today, thank you. Take good care. Shabbat Shalom. Following this Torah study, of course, you have, following Torah study, you're welcome to join us for Shabbat davening this morning. And then at 11:30, Rabbi Silverman's words of Torah. And we'll see you during the course of the week. And we wish you a very, very sweet and peaceful Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.